Hey, hey, hey. Time for another out-of-this-world story from rSpace. They say charity begins at home, unless your wife starts volunteering a little too intimately and ends up pitching a tent with the very man she was supposed to be helping. Today on rSpace, dumpster dive date nights. Wife had an affair with a homeless man she volunteered with. Now they're homeless together. My wife, Amy, 27 female, and I, 28 male, have been married for 6 years. It's been a good 6 years of marriage, all things considered. I absolutely adored this woman, and I always thought of her as a kind woman with a big heart. I'm a bit of a cynical, closed-off guy myself, so when I met her, she was like a ray of sunshine, and I just knew I had to marry her. Unfortunately, that wasn't who she really was, or somehow something changed along the way. You don't always know why things change, to be honest. One of the things I'd always loved about her was her passion for giving back to the community. She was the type who was actively involved in community activities. She organized fundraisers with the local school, even though we didn't have children. When the local church wanted to host a bake sale, she'd fire up that oven and start baking peanut butter cookies. I respected her selflessness and always supported her charitable activities. I never expected that would be one of the things about her I'd hate the most. It started when she told me that she wanted to volunteer at a soup kitchen. She was pretty excited about feeding the homeless and people who were down on their luck. I understood how that was important work, but I personally couldn't understand feeling excited about it. But it meant a lot to her, so I was supportive of her efforts. On her first day of volunteering, she left in the afternoon and came back around 6. Everything seemed normal. She had lots of fun stories about the people she met and worked with. I listened and tried to share in her enthusiasm. I was just happy that she was doing something that made her feel fulfilled. She even asked if I wanted to come along next time. I declined. I wouldn't enjoy it half as much as she did, and I'd just kill the mood. But things started to change as time went by. She only went to the kitchen twice a week, but she was staying longer and longer each time. Eventually, she started coming home by 8 o'clock. She always had an excuse ready when I asked her about it. Sometimes there was a big mess that needed to be cleaned up. Another time, one of the other homeless people started a fight and caused a commotion that took a while to sort out. She always had a story that made perfect sense. I didn't want to seem paranoid by pushing too hard, but something just didn't feel right to me. I couldn't ignore the red flags anymore when I noticed the change in how she acted at home. Suddenly she was guarding her phone like it contained state secrets. She always had it in her hands, and she would slightly angle it away from me whenever she was on it. I knew I had to do something the day I was looking for something under the couch and asked her to pass me her phone. I just wanted to use the flashlight to help me search. Instead, she said her phone's battery was low, and she ran off to get mine. When she got back with my phone, I watched her carefully. She tapped away on her phone for nearly an hour afterwards before she went to charge it. Obviously, her battery hadn't been low. Once I figured that out, it became obvious what was going on. She was spending more and more time out of the house. She was so protective of her phone that she wouldn't even let me use the flashlight. She was having an affair. I was convinced of it. The only question was, who was she sleeping with? I tried to figure out the best way to approach this. The most direct method of finding out what was going on would be to get into her phone, but I can't emphasize enough just how protective she was of it. It was never more than a few feet away from her at all times. She even took it into the bathroom with her. I thought of confronting her directly, but I knew she would just lie, and then she would tighten up her act, and I'd have no hope of catching her. I knew I had to be smart, so I decided I would follow her the next time she went for her volunteer work to see where she was really headed. After 3 painful days of waiting around and pretending everything was just fine, I finally got my chance. She told me she was heading out to volunteer, and I just said I would see her later. I was trying to act casual, but my heart was pounding. I was worried I might be spotted following her, but what really scared me was what I might find out. I got outside to pretend to wave her off, and I started my car as soon as she drove off. Following her was tricky, but not as hard as I expected. Honestly, the hardest part was my own nerves tripping me up. She'd never had a good eye for cars, so she probably wouldn't even have picked me out if I'd driven right behind her. My heart sank when I realized we weren't heading in the direction of the homeless shelter. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, though. I was making so many excuses for her. Maybe she needed to pick something up for the work they had to do that day. Volunteering wasn't just about standing around and dishing out food. Some people had to do supply runs. Maybe that was her role today. Unfortunately, that wasn't it. I actually felt like I was going to have an anxiety attack when she pulled into the parking lot of the motel. I parked across the street and started recording immediately on my phone. The zoom made the pictures pretty blurry, but it was still good enough to tell that it was her. She didn't bother going to the front desk. She just went to one of the doors and knocked. After a few seconds, someone opened it for her. It was too far for me to tell if I recognized him, and he was only visible for a few seconds before she went in, and he closed the door. I felt completely numb. I sat there for a few seconds with my phone still recording. After a few seconds, the shock turned to anger. There was no questioning what I'd just seen. She was pretending to volunteer to cover up her affair, and she was doing it in this shabby motel. I actually felt disgusted. At that point, I had no idea how many of her charitable acts were covers for her to cheat. I debated on what to do next for a while. I had the video of her. I could just go home and do things the right way. Talk to a lawyer, confront her when she came back, and kick her out of the house. But I knew she'd just lie to me. She'd probably tell me it was part of her volunteer work. Maybe she was providing counseling for someone. I'd had enough of the BS. So I got out of the car and headed straight for the door I'd seen her enter. I stormed across the parking lot, getting angrier with each step. By the time I got to the door, I was furious. I banged on the door so hard that I felt like I was going to take it off its hinges. I probably could have, if I really wanted to. I don't think I had ever been as angry as that in my life. There had been a bit of noise coming from inside the room at first, and it went dead silent as soon as I knocked. I knew I wasn't mistaken. They were both in the room, and they had been pretty physically active until a few seconds ago. I banged on the door again. This time, I shouted Amy's name and said I knew she was in there, and I wanted to talk to her. Nothing again. By this point, I was causing a full-on scene. A few people poked their heads out of the nearby doors to see what was going on. The motel receptionist, or whatever you call the person who gives out the keys, must have been alerted and came out to ask me to stop. I remember shouting that my wife was in there. The receptionist was young, probably somewhere between 18 and 22. She looked scared and said that she'd have to call the police if I didn't stop. I didn't stop for a moment, and I considered my options. I could keep knocking, and they'd pretend they weren't in there. Then I'd have the cops to deal with. Or I could go home, and when she got back, she would do her best to pretend this never happened. I stood there thinking for a while, and the receptionist just watched me with a worried look on her face. I realized that she probably thought I was unpredictable, and the cops would think the same thing too. I took a few breaths to calm myself down and decided a cheating wife wasn't worth going to jail over. I apologized to the girl and told her I would leave. Then I crossed the street and went back to my car. While I was in the car, I thought for a moment. I didn't have to leave. The two of them would eventually need to leave the room. And being caught by her husband was probably a real mood killer. I had a feeling they wouldn't be in there much longer, so I started the car and drove away just to make them think I left, in case they were watching me. I didn't leave though. I gave it 2 minutes, and then I drove around the block and parked down the street from the motel. This gave me a good vantage point where I could watch them leave without being seen myself. So I waited. Maybe I was wrong about killing the mood, or maybe they just wanted to be completely sure I was gone, because it took close to 3 hours before I finally saw Amy making her way to her car. She was practically running, and she was looking around in every direction. She looked terrified. I mean, obviously, I had spooked her with my door pounding. I threw my car in gear and raced down until I was parked beside her car. She jumped in when she saw me. I got out of the car. By now, I'd had some time to cool down. I was still pissed, but I was level-headed enough to not cause another scene. I stood in front of her car, blocking her from opening the door. I asked if this was what she always did when she was out volunteering. She didn't answer. That was when I noticed her eyes were red and puffy. She'd been crying. She still was. I asked her who the guy was, and she just said I wouldn't know him. She told me she was so sorry, and she hated that I had to find out like this. I asked her how she planned for me to find out, but she didn't have an answer for that. I said I couldn't believe that she would do this. All this time I thought she was some kind of saint. I used to boast to my friends about how active she was in volunteer work, but the whole time it was just a cover for her to sleep around. She took offense to that. She told me that her volunteer work was real, and that she'd met him while volunteering. She wasn't a total liar. I found that ironic, considering we were standing outside the motel where she'd come to meet her lover, and her real concern was that I had implied she was a liar. I asked if she wanted a reward for not being a complete scumbag. That was when we devolved into a real shouting match, and we got interrupted by the last person I expected to see. Her lover, the same guy who had opened the door to the motel room, came out, stood by her side and said, "I'm gonna need you to stop bothering her." I was so shocked that I couldn't speak for a moment. First of all, the audacity would have been funny if not for how serious the situation was. Second, the guy wasn't put together at all. He wore a tattered coat. It looked like he'd seen better days. When my wife said she'd met him while volunteering, I'd assumed she meant he was another volunteer. I was certain that the man in front of me was more likely to be lining up for food than volunteering any services. Seeing that set something off in me. I'm not trying to be classist or anything, but you'd assume that when your partner cheats on you, they'd be aiming for a step up, not an obvious step down. I just couldn't believe my wife would step out on our marriage for someone who probably didn't even have his own place to stay. It baffled me. I looked him up and down, and completely speechless. He looked like he hadn't held a job down in months, if not longer. I turned to Amy incredulously and asked her if she'd really walked out on our marriage for this. She just said, I couldn't understand. He had a good soul, and they'd been drawn together. I said she should think about holding on to their motel room for a little longer because she wasn't coming back home tonight. That's what got her. She begged me not to kick her out because she didn't have anywhere else to stay. I told her she should have considered that before started sleeping with someone who didn't have a home. I told her that I had the two of them on video. It was solid proof of their affair, and I'd be filing for divorce soon. She kept begging me to let her stay at home. She didn't say anything about the divorce. She was just upset that she wasn't going to have a place to stay. I told her she could come get her stuff, but she wasn't sleeping another night in the house. I got back in my car and drove home. The first thing I did was pack all of her stuff, everything she owned, into a nice little pile in the living room. After that, I started looking for a lawyer. I wasn't going to waste any more time with her. Sure enough, she came back for her stuff in the evening. She begged me to give her another chance. She said that we hadn't even talked about everything before I decided on a divorce. I said she had had plenty of chances to talk if that's what she wanted, and said she'd had an affair and lied to me. She was the one who had decided to end our marriage, not me. Eventually, she accepted defeat and took her things into her car. When she took out the last batch of stuff, I didn't even wait for her to get to her car or say goodbye. I just slammed the door behind her and locked it. In the time since then, I've talked to a lawyer and gotten started with the divorce. He told me the evidence I had wasn't completely solid, but he had a good feeling that we could make it work. That was better than nothing, as far as I was concerned. Ever since I discovered that my wife was lying to me about so many parts of her life, I haven't known what to believe anymore. I've considered going to therapy, but I want to hold out on it for now. I think I'll be in a better headspace when the divorce is finalized, and I'm waiting until then before I make any major decisions. You gave your wife the benefit of the doubt, trusted her intentions, and supported her passions. That's what a good partner does. And if she took that trust and used it as camouflage to carry out a full-on affair at a motel of all places, then the guy has the gall to come out and tell you to stop bothering her, as if you were the problem. That's rich. Whatever you choose to do next, just know you're not crazy, and you weren't blind. You were lied to. There's a big difference. Update. For those who were clamoring for an update, it's finally here. I've been planning to post an update for a long time, but there were so many developments coming one after another that it never felt like it was the right time to post everything. Well, now that the dust has settled, it feels like the right time to come forward with all that's happened. First, I was surprised to find out that my wife and her new man were still together. She really did see something in him, I guess. I had to wonder what he had that was better than a large home, a stable income, and loyalty. According to her, he had a good soul. Maybe that really was it. Well, we'll see how well that will provide for her. I found out about that when we wanted to serve her the divorce papers. I asked for her address, and I couldn't believe it when she told me that she was still staying in the same motel room where I'd caught them. They really didn't have anywhere else to go. It was so pathetic that I could have felt sad for her. Instead, I was just embarrassed for her. Especially when she called me and asked me to go for mediation instead of taking things to court. She had a simple request. She would forego alimony and accept a lower marital split if she could just get the house. I laughed in her face. She wasn't moving into my house with another man. The court would have to drag me out kicking and screaming before I'd let that happen. Besides, her plan didn't make any sense. She hadn't rented a new place yet because she didn't make much, and she was supporting an actual bum. There was no way the two of them would be able to pay the rent for where we lived. She said she and Marcus, her new man, would get their act straight once they had a new house. She would apply for better job opportunities, and he was a good man who just needed a chance. I couldn't believe how stupid she was being. She sounded like a teenage girl infatuated with her first crush. There was no logic or reason in anything she said. There was no talking any sense into Amy, and I didn't care enough to. Either way, she wasn't getting the mediation she wanted. My lawyer asked me to seriously consider it. He said it would be a sweet deal for me, but I refused. Maybe I was being emotional too, but I considered it a matter of principle. There was no way I was giving up my house to the man who had taken my wife from me. I would have felt like the ultimate cuck if she used my house to save her affair partner from homelessness. I didn't look forward to the prolonged legal battle, but I was ready to stand up for what I believed in. Once we got to court, I realized why she was so insistent on mediation. It wasn't just that she wanted the house, but she knew she didn't stand a chance. I don't know how I didn't put it together earlier. They didn't have enough money for rent, so she definitely didn't have enough money for a good lawyer. I had a divorce lawyer with more than 2 decades of experience, while her guy looked like he'd just graduated from law school a week ago. With the evidence of her infidelity and the fact that she'd already moved in with another man, if you could call it that, things didn't go well for her. She got a few things that I didn't really care about, but what really made my day was the fact that she didn't get the house. That felt like poetic justice to me. Sure, she got some alimony, but it really wasn't much. They just wanted to make sure that she didn't end up in poverty when the divorce was finalized. Honestly, I didn't care what happened to her afterwards. She was the one who left me. It shouldn't be on me how she ends up, especially since she has another man now. After a few months, they were able to get themselves a new place to stay. I've never been there, but I know that part of town. It's the type of area where the only nice thing you can say about it is that it's affordable. But at least they had a place to stay now, right? Now they could work on turning their lives around, like Amy claimed they would. She'd get a better paying job, and Marcus would find his feet. To nobody's surprise, that was just another lie she'd told herself. Her man with a good soul, who just needed another chance? He was caught with drugs and ended up getting arrested. Drug use violated the terms of their lease, and less than 2 months into renting, the two of them ended up getting kicked out of their new apartment. I don't know where they've ended up now, but I wouldn't be surprised if they were back renting a room in their favorite motel. A few days after I heard about his arrest, Amy called me crying. She said she knew that we'd ended things on bad terms, and that she'd made a horrible mistake. For a second, I thought she was about to ask me to take her back. Somehow that would have been better than what she really called me for. She asked if I could help pay for her lawyer for Marcus. I told her straight up that she already had the alimony to cover any needs she had, and that was the end of my obligations to her. If her saint of a man needed legal help, she could get it from there. She pleaded with me to be reasonable, but I told her that I was already being plenty reasonable by even hearing her out. Then I hung up on her. She called me a few times after that, but I didn't pick up. When it became clear that she wasn't going to stop calling me, I blocked her number. The divorce was finalized and she was out of my life. There wasn't anything we still needed to talk about anymore. My life is a lot more peaceful now without her in it. I'll say that much. I was happy when I was married, but she threw all that away on a whim. But it's infinitely better to be alone than to be with someone you can't trust. Your ex calling you to ask you to help him after everything is honestly delusional. The lack of self-awareness is staggering. Blocking her was probably the healthiest thing you could have done. If you didn't lose anything of value, she did. And now she's finding out the hard way what that loyalty, stability, and self-respect can't be replaced by a good soul who shows up to court with a public defender and a record. You're right. Being alone and at peace beats being with someone who treated your trust like it was disposable. Ever get that weird vibe when someone suddenly gets super secretive of their phone? What happened? Share your stories with us in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time.